I was sitting at my desk, halfway through redesigning a logo for a sustainable fashion startup, when my phone rang with a number I didn't immediately recognize. Hello, Emma? This is Richard Chen from Morrison and Associates. We met at the company picnic last summer. I remembered him vaguely. A kind-faced man in his 50s who had complimented my photography when I'd been taking candid shots of the event. My father, Robert Rodriguez, had worked at Morrison and Associates for 23 years, a prestigious architecture firm in downtown Seattle where he held the position of senior architect. Yes, of course. How can I help you? I asked, already sensing something was wrong from the hesitation in his voice. Richard cleared his throat uncomfortably. I'm calling because something happened on the corporate retreat last weekend. Your father recorded a video on his phone during the fishing trip. I think he meant to save it to his personal cloud storage, but he accidentally uploaded it to our company shared drive instead. My stomach tightened. What kind of video? Richard paused, and I could hear him struggling with how much to tell me. Emma, I'm going to be direct because I think you deserve to know. Your father was drinking, and he recorded himself talking about you. He called you the mistake child. He said some very hurtful things about your life, your career, your relationship with the family. I saw it before he realized his error and deleted it from the drive. I've been wrestling with whether to tell you, but if someone spoke about my daughter that way, I'd want her to know. The words hit me like a physical blow, but underneath the shock was something else. Something that felt almost like recognition. What exactly did he say? I asked quietly, my hand gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Richard sighed deeply. He complained that you were a disappointment, that you cost the family emotional energy, that your brothers had made something of themselves while you were still trying to figure out your life. He said you were needy and attention-seeking. Emma, I want you to know that I don't believe any of that is true. The brief interaction we had at the picnic showed me you're talented and thoughtful. I felt you should know this happened. I thanked him mechanically and ended the call, then sat staring at my computer screen without seeing it. I was 28 years old. A successful freelance graphic designer with my own apartment in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood. But in that moment, I felt like a child again, desperate for scraps of approval from a father who had never seen me as anything but an afterthought. My two older brothers, Michael and David, had always been the golden children. Their mediocre achievements celebrated, while my genuine successes were dismissed as hobbies or lucky breaks. I had always suspected my father saw me differently, saw me as less than, but I had convinced myself over the years that I was imagining the disparity, being too sensitive, misreading his intentions. Now I had confirmation, recorded in his own voice, that everything I had felt was real. The mistake child. That's what I was to him. That's what I had always been. Before continuing the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers to be able to bring you stories like this every day. For you, it's just a click, but for me, it means a lot. I spent the rest of that afternoon sitting in my apartment, Richard's words echoing in my mind, and I found myself remembering all the moments that had led to this one, all the small dismissals and casual cruelties that had taught me my place in the Rodriguez family hierarchy. I was the third child, unplanned and unexpected, born when my mother Patricia was 41 and had believed her family was complete with two sons. Michael had been 8 when I arrived, David 6, and my father had made no secret of his disappointment that I wasn't the daughter who would dote on him, but rather a quiet, artistic child who preferred sketchbooks to sports. Every Saturday morning throughout my childhood, my father would wake early to drive my brothers to their soccer games, spending entire days on cold metal bleachers cheering for them, analyzing their plays during the drive home, stopping for celebratory ice cream whether they won or lost. When I had my first art show in 5th grade, a small exhibition in the school gymnasium where my watercolor of our family dog had won second place, My parents arrived 40 minutes late and left before the reception ended because Michael had a playoff game the next morning and needed to rest. I remembered standing next to my painting, watching other children's parents take photos and offer praise, feeling the specific shame of being 11 years old, and understanding that you are not priority enough for punctuality. My father worked at Morrison and Associates, and throughout my teenage years, every dinner conversation centered on architecture, on design principles and structural integrity, on the legacy he hoped to build through his sons who would follow in his professional footsteps. When I showed him my acceptance letter to the Pacific Northwest College of Art with a partial scholarship based on my portfolio, he glanced at it and said, "That's nice, honey, but what's your real plan for supporting yourself?" My mother had been silent during that conversation, as she was silent during so many moments when I needed her to speak, her complicity woven through my childhood, like a thread I only learned to see once I had distance from it. I graduated top of my design school class 4 years later, earned the departmental award for excellence in visual communication, and my parents came to the ceremony, but arrived as it was starting and left immediately after my name was called, missing the reception where my professors had wanted to introduce me to potential employers. Michael had gotten a used Toyota Camry for his high school graduation, David a Honda Accord for his, but when I graduated from college with honors and a degree, my father still called art stuff. I received a card with $100 bill inside and a note that said, "Congratulations, love Mom and Dad," in my mother's handwriting. These were not the dramatic abuses that left visible scars, but rather the systematic message delivered through 1,000 small choices that I was less important, less valuable, less worth celebrating than my brothers, and I had spent 28 years trying to prove that message wrong while simultaneously pretending I didn't believe it myself. The painful irony of my adult life was that I had actually become successful by any reasonable measure, but my family had constructed a narrative about my failure so complete and so resilient that no amount of evidence could penetrate it. I was making $95,000 a year as a freelance graphic designer, working with clients that ranged from local Seattle businesses to 3 Fortune 500 companies whose names anyone would recognize. Yet my family operated under the unwavering assumption that I was perpetually on the brink of financial collapse. I had not asked them for money since college, had never requested loans or help with rent, had in fact paid for my own education through a combination of scholarships, part-time work, and student loans I had diligently paid off by age 26. But they treated me like a charity case whose pride prevented her from accepting the assistance she so desperately needed. The most recent and humiliating example had occurred just 3 weeks earlier at a family dinner at Anthony's on the Seattle waterfront. One of those forced gatherings that happened every few months where we pretended we were a close and functional family. We had just finished our entrees when my father reached into his wallet, pulled out $200 bills, and slid them across the table toward me with a loud announcement that carried to neighboring tables. "Here, Emma, take this for your rent. I know things are tight." I had felt my face flush hot with embarrassment and tried to push the money back toward him. "Dad, I don't need that. I'm fine financially." He had insisted with the particular stubbornness of someone who believes he is being generous. "Emma, don't be proud. We're family. We take care of each other." The "we're family" argument, always deployed to justify their intrusions and assumptions, never their absences. I had refused again, my voice low, desperate not to make a scene, but he had pressed the bills into my hand while my mother nodded approvingly, and my brothers watched with expressions that suggested they found my resistance both amusing and ungrateful. I had finally taken the money, just to end the public spectacle, then donated it to the Seattle Art Museum the next day because keeping it felt like accepting their false narrative about my life. What made the situation even more absurd was that both of my brothers, the golden children whose every mediocre achievement warranted celebration, were objectively less successful in their careers than I was. Michael, at 32, was an assistant manager at a sporting goods store in Bellevue, making around $48,000 a year, a job my father described as building retail management experience, with the implication that greater things were inevitable. David, 30, worked in sales for a medical supply company with an income that fluctuated but averaged around $55,000 annually, and my father constantly praised his entrepreneurial spirit and people skills. I had designed award-winning campaigns that had been featured in industry publications, had work in my portfolio that had generated millions of dollars in revenue for my clients, but no one in my family had ever asked to see that work or inquired about the specifics of what I actually did all day. They knew I did something with computers and art, and that was the extent of their interest, a dismissiveness that would have been almost funny if it hadn't carved out such a persistent hollow in my chest where their pride should have been. Richard's call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was working on mock-ups for a sustainable fashion brand's rebrand, and I recognized his voice immediately, even though we had only met once at Morrison and Associates' summer company picnic 2 years earlier when I had reluctantly attended as my father's guest. "Emma, this is Richard Chen from your father's firm. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time," he said, and there was something in his tone, a careful awkwardness, that made me save my work and give him my full attention. Richard was a senior partner, maybe 55, with kind eyes and a gentle manner that had stood out at that picnic when he had actually asked me about my work and listened to my answers with genuine interest, while my father stood nearby looking impatient for the conversation to end. "I'm calling about something uncomfortable," Richard continued, and I could hear him choosing his words with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this conversation. "Your father went on a corporate retreat last weekend, a fishing trip up in the San Juans with several colleagues. He recorded some video on his phone, personal stuff, and he accidentally uploaded it to the company's shared drive instead of his personal cloud storage." My chest tightened with a premonition I couldn't quite name. He realized the mistake this morning and deleted it, but I had already seen it. "Emma, I debated whether to tell you about this, but I think you deserve to know what was said." The kitchen suddenly felt too small, the autumn light through my apartment window too bright. "What kind of video?" I asked, though some part of me already knew this would be bad. That Richard would not be making this call if it were anything less than devastating. He was drinking, probably quite drunk, and he was talking to the camera about his family, about you specifically. Richard paused, and I heard him take a breath. "He called you his mistake child. He said you were a disappointment, that you cost him and your mother emotional energy they didn't have to spare. He talked about your brothers having made something of themselves while you were still struggling to figure out what you wanted to be when you grew up." Each word landed like a physical blow, and I found myself sitting down at my kitchen table without consciously deciding to move. "Emma, I'm sorry. I know this must be painful to hear, but the things he said were cruel, and I felt you should know that he's saying these things, even if he believes they're private." I should have felt shocked, but instead what washed over me was a terrible clarity, the crystallization of years of suspicion into confirmed fact. Was anyone else there when he recorded it? Did anyone hear him? Richard's silence told me the answer before he spoke. "Your brothers were visible in the background. They were laughing." Of course they were. Of course they had heard our father call me his mistake child and had found it amusing rather than appalling. "Thank you for telling me," I managed to say, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "I know this was an awkward call to make." Richard's response was quiet but firm. "For what it's worth, Emma, I've always been impressed by you from our brief conversation at that picnic. What your father said in that video doesn't reflect reality, at least not the reality I saw when you talked about your work with such passion and knowledge. I'm sorry he can't see what I saw in just one conversation." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, watching the light change as afternoon moved toward evening, and I felt something fundamental shift inside me, like a bone that had been broken my entire life finally being set properly, painfully but necessarily, into its correct position. I called Richard back 20 minutes after our conversation ended, my hands still shaking but my mind crystallizing around a single urgent need. And when he answered, I didn't bother with pleasantries. Can you send me the video before my father deletes it completely? I know he removed it from the shared drive, but if you downloaded it, or if there's any way to retrieve it, I need to see it for myself. Richard was quiet for a long moment, and I could hear the ethical calculation happening in that silence, the weighing of professional boundaries against human compassion. Emma, I'm not sure watching it is a good idea. Sometimes knowing something was said is enough without experiencing it directly. But I pressed, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. I've spent 28 years wondering if I was imagining things, if I was too sensitive, if the differential treatment was all in my head. I need documentation. I need to know I'm not crazy. Richard sighed, a sound of resignation and understanding. I'll send it to your personal email. I made a copy before it was deleted because, honestly, I was concerned about the content. But Emma, please watch it somewhere you feel safe. Maybe not alone. The video arrived in my inbox 14 minutes later, and I did not follow Richard's advice about not being alone because I needed to experience this privately, to have my reaction witnessed by no one, to break down if necessary, without an audience. I sat on my couch with my laptop, the late afternoon light slanting through my apartment windows, and I pressed play. My father's face filled the screen, flushed with alcohol and sunburn, the blue water of the San Juans visible behind him, and he was smiling in that loose way drunk people smile when they think they're being profound. Okay, personal thoughts, October 7th, he said to the camera, and I realized he had been making some kind of video diary. Beautiful day out here, good fishing, good company, and I'm thinking about family, about my boys and how proud I am of them. He cast his line, reeled it in slowly. Michael's really making something of himself in retail management, and David's got that sales instinct, that charisma. They're both going to do great things. He paused, took a drink from a beer can that sat beside him. Then there's Emma. And I don't know, sometimes I forget I even have a daughter, you know? She calls and I'm like, oh, right, the third kid, the mistake. He laughed, actually laughed, and I felt something crack in my chest. Patricia and I never planned on a third kid, and Emma's just been this needy presence ever since, always wanting attention, always wanting us to care about her art projects or her little computer hobby. Never should have had a third kid, honestly. She takes up so much emotional energy, and for what? She's 28 and still hasn't figured out what she wants to be when she grows up, still struggling to make rent, probably going to need our financial support forever. In the background, clearly audible, I heard Michael's voice say, "The mistake child strikes again." And both my brothers laughed, and my father grinned at them conspiratorially. Her brothers actually made something of themselves, my father continued. Emma's just coasting, and I'm tired of pretending to be interested in her little design things she shows me on her phone like I'm supposed to be impressed. The video ended abruptly, just 90 seconds that dismantled 28 years of hoping I was wrong about how little I mattered to them, and I sat in my darkening apartment with tears streaming down my face, feeling simultaneously devastated and strangely liberated, because now I knew, definitively and without question, that I needed to stop seeking approval from people who had never had any intention of giving it. I didn't call my family for a week after watching that video, and the most telling thing, the detail that hurt almost as much as my father's words, was that not one of them noticed my absence or reached out to check if I was okay. I threw myself into work with an intensity that bordered on obsessive, channeling all the pain and clarity and rage into the campaign I was designing for a tech startup called Momentum that specialized in project management software for creative teams. And something about pouring my devastation into my work unlocked a level of creativity I hadn't accessed before. As if finally seeing the truth about my family had freed something in me that had been constrained by the constant effort of seeking their approval. The designs I created that week were bold and innovative, using negative space in ways that felt metaphorical, empty spaces that suggested absence and the beauty that could exist in what wasn't there. And my client contact at Momentum, a woman named Jessica Park, emailed me 3 times during that week to tell me the work was exceeding every expectation they'd had. On Thursday afternoon, 5 days after watching the video, I had my regular appointment with Dr. Sarah Chen, the therapist I'd been seeing every other week for the past 6 months, initially for general anxiety, but increasingly for family issues. And when I walked into her office in the Fremont neighborhood, I must have looked different because she took one look at my face and said, "Something's happened." I told her about the video, playing it for her on my laptop because I needed someone else to witness it, to confirm that I wasn't overreacting or being too sensitive. And Dr. Chen watched it with her professional composure intact until it ended. Then she was quiet for a long moment before saying, "Emma, I'm so sorry. That must have been incredibly painful to see. But I also want you to recognize something important here, which is that this video confirms what we've been talking about for months. The pattern of dismissal and differential treatment you've described is real and documented. You're not imagining it." We spent the rest of that session talking about what I wanted to do with this information, and Dr. Chen helped me understand that I didn't owe my family a confrontation or an explanation, that sometimes the healthiest response to people who had hurt you was simply to create distance and stop participating in the dynamic that had been damaging you. "You've spent 28 years trying to earn their approval," she said gently. "And this video makes it clear that nothing you do will be enough, because the problem isn't your worth or your achievements. The problem is their inability or unwillingness to see you." I left that therapy session feeling something I hadn't felt in years, maybe ever when it came to my family, which was a sense of permission to simply walk away, to stop trying, to redirect all that energy I'd been spending on seeking their love toward building a life that didn't require their validation. I decided I wouldn't confront them about the video yet, wouldn't give them the opportunity to gaslight me or minimize what had been said. But I also decided I would stop pretending, stop showing up for family dinners where I was treated like a charity case, stop accepting their narrative about my life and my worth. That week of silence, of working and thinking and talking with Dr. Chen, was the week I began to understand that my father calling me his mistake child on video was devastating but also clarifying. A painful gift that showed me exactly where I stood so I could finally stop hoping for something different and start building something better. My mother called on a Tuesday evening exactly 9 days after I'd watched the video. Her voice bright with the kind of forced cheerfulness she used when she was assigning tasks she knew weren't really optional. And before I could even say hello properly, she launched into an excited monologue about my father's 60th birthday party planned for next month at the Cascade Country Club, a venue I knew cost a minimum of $15,000 to book for private events. "We're doing a really big celebration," she said. "All of your father's colleagues from the firm will be there, including the senior partners, and of course all the family. And Emma, I'm going to need you to help with the planning. There's so much to coordinate." She went on to detail her vision: a formal dinner for 80 guests, followed by dancing, a slideshow of family photos, speeches from people who loved him, and then she got to the part I'd been waiting for, the part where my role in this celebration would be defined. "I'd like you to contribute about $500 toward costs, and of course we'll need you to give a speech about what a wonderful father he's been to you, maybe 5 minutes or so, something heartfelt." I felt something shift in my chest, a refusal forming that a week ago I might have swallowed down. But Dr. Chen's words were still fresh in my mind about not participating in dynamics that damaged me, and the image of my father's face on that video saying he sometimes forgot he had a daughter was impossible to unsee. "I'll come to the party," I said carefully, "but I'm not going to help plan it. And I'm not comfortable giving a speech." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped, and then my mother's voice came back cooler, clipped. Well, I suppose your brothers will just have to do all the real work as usual. They're already handling so much. Michael is organizing the whole bar service, and David is coordinating with the caterers. But I guess we can't expect you to contribute much. The dismissiveness in her tone was so familiar, it almost didn't hurt, almost. And after we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and opened a new document, something I'd been thinking about since my therapy session. And I started documenting every dismissive interaction I could remember, dating back to childhood, creating a timeline of small cruelties and casual neglect that, when viewed together, painted an undeniable pattern. I wrote for 2 hours, filling pages with memories I'd been minimizing for years. And when I finally closed the laptop, I felt exhausted, but also strangely clear-eyed about something I'd been avoiding acknowledging, which was that I'd been tolerating this treatment for 28 years, participating in my own diminishment by continuing to show up and hope for something different. That night, I stayed up late watching videos about family dynamics and reading articles about setting boundaries with toxic relatives, absorbing vocabulary for things I'd experienced but never named. Terms like scapegoat child and golden child syndrome and emotional neglect. And with each article I read, I felt simultaneously more devastated that this had been my reality and more determined that it wouldn't be my future. Michael and David showed up at my apartment on a Saturday afternoon, 3 days after my conversation with my mother about the party planning, the buzzer ringing insistently until I answered it. And when I opened the door to find both of them standing in the hallway, I was so surprised I couldn't immediately form words, because in the 2 years I'd lived in this apartment, neither of them had visited even once, despite my inviting them to see the place when I first moved in. "Hey, Em. We were in the neighborhood, so we thought we'd stop by," Michael said with the kind of casual tone that immediately made me suspicious, because my apartment in Capitol Hill was nowhere near either of their usual routes. And they walked in without waiting for an invitation, looking around my space with the cursory interest of people evaluating something they'd already decided wasn't worth much attention. David made some comment about the place being smaller than he expected, which was ridiculous because my one bedroom was actually quite spacious at 850 square feet, with beautiful hardwood floors and huge windows that let in incredible natural light. But I swallowed the defensive response rising in my throat and asked if they wanted coffee or water. They both declined, and Michael got straight to the point in a way that made it clear this hadn't been a casual drop-by at all. "So Mom mentioned you're not helping much with Dad's party, and we thought maybe you could at least contribute by designing the invitations, since that's kind of your thing." I felt my stomach tighten because I could see exactly where this was going, the casual assumption that my work was something I should provide for free, and I kept my voice even when I said, "I charge $800 for custom invitation suites, but I can recommend some template websites that are much more affordable for party invitations." The silence that followed was heavy with confusion, and then Michael actually laughed, a dismissive sound that made my face flush hot. "Come on, Em. We're not going to pay you. We're family. Family doesn't charge family for stuff like this." David nodded in agreement and added, "Yeah, it would take you what, an hour maybe? Just whip something up. It's not like we're asking you to do actual work." The word actual hit like a small slap, and I felt something harden in my chest, that same refusal that had been growing stronger since I watched the video of my father calling me his mistake child. And I walked over to my desk area where I had my professional portfolio displayed and my client contract templates visible, and I showed them my rate sheet, my client list that included 3 Fortune 500 companies, my awards and testimonials. "This is actual work," I said quietly. "This is my career, and I'm good at it. And I charge professional rates because I'm a professional." Michael exchanged a look with David that I recognized immediately, that mixture of amusement and pity they'd perfected over years of dismissing me. "Emma, come on. We know you're not really making money doing your little art thing. It's okay to admit it, but making invitations for Dad's party isn't going to hurt you." David reached over and actually patted my shoulder like I was a child who needed comforting. Anyone can make a website look good these days. There are templates for everything. But this is family. This is different. They left 15 minutes later after I refused 3 more times to design the invitations for free. And as I closed the door behind them, I was shaking. But underneath the shakiness was something else. Something solid and unmovable. Which was the knowledge that I had held a boundary even when they'd tried to make me feel small for having it. And that felt like progress, even though it hurt. The email from my client at Novatech Solutions arrived on a Wednesday morning 2 weeks after my brothers had left my apartment annoyed about the invitation situation, and when I opened it my first reaction was confusion, because Dimitri never sent messages marked urgent unless something had gone genuinely wrong with a project. Emma, we need to move the campaign launch up by 6 weeks, the message read. Our main competitor just announced a product in the same space, and we need to get ahead of the news cycle. I know this is earlier than we planned, but the campaign is strong enough to launch now, and honestly, I think it's going to make a major splash. I sat staring at my laptop screen, feeling my heart rate pick up, because moving a launch timeline up meant the work I'd been planning to refine and perfect over the next month and a half would go live essentially as it was. And while I knew objectively that the campaign was good, possibly the best work I'd ever done, there's a difference between knowing something privately and having it exposed to public judgment. I called Dimitri and we talked through the logistics, and he kept using words like phenomenal and game-changing when describing my designs, and by the end of the conversation, I'd agreed to the accelerated timeline, even though my hands were shaking slightly when I hung up. The campaign went live on a Friday at 9 in the morning Pacific Time, a coordinated launch across social media platforms, tech news sites, and a Times Square billboard that made me feel slightly sick with nervousness when Dimitri sent me a photo of my design 40 feet tall in the heart of Manhattan. By noon, my phone was buzzing constantly with notifications. My Instagram account that I used professionally suddenly gaining followers at a rate I'd never experienced, hundreds and then thousands of people finding my profile and following within hours. The campaign had gone viral in the specific way that tech industry launches sometimes do when they catch the cultural moment exactly right. My designs showing up in screenshot threads on Twitter, being shared by major tech influencers, getting written about in TechCrunch and The Verge with phrases like visually stunning and breakthrough branding approach. Dimitri called me at 3 in the afternoon, practically shouting with excitement because 3 major news outlets had requested interviews with him about the product launch, and every single one of them had specifically mentioned the visual campaign and asked for the designer's name. Emma, they want to talk to you too. They're calling you a genius. This is exactly the kind of attention we were hoping for, but honestly, I didn't think it would happen this fast, or this big. Over the weekend, my Instagram followers climbed past 15,000, and my inbox filled with messages from creative directors at major design firms in Seattle, San Francisco, New York, companies I dreamed of working for when I was in design school, all of them reaching out with some version of, "We've been following your work, and we'd love to talk to you about opportunities." One email from a boutique agency in Seattle that I particularly admired mentioned a creative director position with a salary range of $150,000 to $170,000, and I had to read it 3 times before I could believe it was real. My phone rang constantly with professional opportunities and congratulations from people in the design community and former classmates who'd seen the campaign, but the family group chat stayed completely silent. And when I checked my mother's Facebook page on Sunday evening, I saw she'd posted about Michael's promotion to store manager at his sporting goods store, with 3 paragraphs of proud parent commentary, but nothing about my campaign that had been covered by national media outlets. On Monday morning, I received an email from Richard with the subject line, "Congratulations." And when I opened it, the message was brief but warm, saying he'd seen my campaign featured in the business section of the newspaper and recognized my name and wanted to tell me the work was extraordinary, and he wasn't surprised at all that I was getting this kind of recognition. And something about receiving acknowledgement from someone connected to my father's world made the success feel more real somehow, like proof that my professional achievements existed, even in spaces where my family might eventually hear about them. Richard's follow up email arrived 2 days after his congratulations message, and the subject line read, "Something you should know," which made my stomach clench with immediate anxiety because those 5 words never preceded good news. I opened it sitting at my desk on a Wednesday morning with coffee going cold beside my laptop, and the first line said, "Emma, I've been wrestling with whether to tell you this, but given everything that's happened, I think you deserve to know the full picture." And I had to read it twice before continuing, because I could feel this was going to be significant. Richard explained that when my father had accidentally uploaded that video to the company shared drive 3 months earlier, he hadn't been the only partner who'd seen it before. My father realized his mistake and deleted it, that at least 4 other senior partners had viewed the video during the roughly 45 minutes it had been accessible, and all of them had been disturbed by what they'd witnessed. "Your father's attitude toward you was shocking to us," Richard wrote, "especially because several of us looked up your work afterward out of curiosity and were genuinely impressed by your portfolio and professional achievements." The email continued, and my hands started shaking as I read that my father had apparently been telling people at the firm for years that I was unemployed and living off my parents' financial support, that he'd cultivated this image of himself as a burdened father dealing with an adult child who couldn't get her life together. And Richard said this narrative had actually garnered my father's sympathy from colleagues who didn't know any better. "Our firm takes character very seriously," Richard's email explained. "We're a family-oriented company, and how our partners conduct themselves personally matters to us. And I want you to know that your father's behavior, both in that video and in the misrepresentations he's made about you, has affected how the senior leadership views him." My heart was pounding as I read the next paragraph where Richard mentioned that my father had been up for promotion to senior partner, a position that would have come with significant prestige and a substantial salary increase, but that the promotion decision had been tabled pending further review of his judgment and character. I sat back from my laptop feeling like the air had been knocked out of my lungs because suddenly so many things made sense. Why my father had been so insistent on maintaining this narrative of me as a failure, how it served his image as a long-suffering parent dealing with difficulty, how my actual success threatened the story he'd been telling. Richard's email ended with, "I'm telling you this not to cause more family pain, but because you should understand that the situation is more complex than you might have realized. And also because I want you to know that those of us who've seen your work have nothing but respect for what you've accomplished, despite apparently receiving very little support from your family." I read the entire email 3 times, and with each reading I felt something shifting inside me. The hurt that had defined my relationship with my father for 28 years transforming into something sharper and cleaner, which was anger, righteous and clarifying, the kind of anger that comes from finally understanding you've been betrayed in ways even worse than you'd imagined. The group text from my mother arrived on a Thursday morning, exactly 2 weeks before my father's 60th birthday party, and when I opened it, I saw she'd sent a message to the family chat that included me, Michael, David, and my father, with the subject line "Party Assignments," followed by a detailed breakdown of responsibilities that made the hierarchy instantly and painfully clear. Michael was assigned to give welcome speech and coordinate with country club staff. David was tasked with manage bar service and give toasts during dinner. My father was listed as guest of honor, just relax and enjoy. And my assignment read, help with setup on day of party, create decorations to keep costs reasonable, assist with breakdown. I stared at my phone, feeling something cold settle in my chest, because even in party planning, my role was reduced to unpaid labor and cost cutting, while my brothers got the visible, honored positions of speech making and hosting. I typed out a response, keeping my tone as neutral as possible, saying, "I'll attend the party, but I won't be able to help with setup or make decorations. I have work commitments that weekend." And I hit send before I could second guess myself. My phone rang less than 3 minutes later with my mother's name on the screen, and I answered knowing exactly what was coming. "Emma, what do you mean you can't help? This is your father's birthday. Everyone needs to contribute," my mother said, her voice tight with the particular frustration she always had when I failed to comply with family expectations. I took a breath and said, "I am contributing by attending, but I have client deadlines and I can't take on free labor for party decorations." And I heard her make a small sound of exasperation. "Free labor? Emma, this is family. Your father has supported you your whole life. You can't do this one thing for him?" The words hit me wrong, hit me in exactly the place that had been tender and angry since reading Richard's email. And I found myself saying very calmly, "What support exactly are you referring to?" There was a pause, and then my mother said, "He's your father. He raised you, paid for your education, supported you through everything." And I could hear that she genuinely believed this narrative. "He paid the minimum required while I was a minor. He gave me $100 for college graduation while Michael and David each got cars. And he spent my entire adult life telling me my career isn't real," I said, and my voice stayed steady, even though my hands were shaking. My mother's response came quick and defensive. "He did his best. You've always been so sensitive about these things. Your brothers never complain about helping the family." I felt something crystallize in that moment, a clarity that cut through 28 years of doubt and self-questioning, and I said, "His best included calling me his mistake child on video." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I checked my phone to make sure the call hadn't dropped, and then my mother said quietly, "You saw that? Emma, he was just joking around. You know how he gets when he's drinking with the guys." Not an apology, not denial that it happened, just immediate minimization and excuse-making. And I realized in that moment that she'd known about the video, had probably heard about it from my father when he'd panicked about the accidental upload, and had decided it wasn't worth addressing with me or defending me over. "I'm done with this conversation," I said, and I ended the call before she could respond. And I sat in my apartment feeling my heart pound and my hands shake, and underneath all of that, a strange sense of relief, because I'd finally stopped pretending that any of this was normal or acceptable. The email arrived on Friday afternoon while I was working on a branding proposal for a sustainable fashion startup, and the sender was listed as Regional Design Awards Committee, with a subject line that read, "Nomination Notification Confidential," which made me click it open immediately with my heart already starting to beat faster. The first line said, "Dear Ms. Rodriguez, we are pleased to inform you that you have been nominated as a finalist for the Regional Design Excellence Awards in 2 categories." And I had to read it 3 times before the words actually penetrated, because this was the kind of recognition I'd dreamed about since design school, but never actually believed would happen to me. The email detailed that I was a finalist for Commercial Campaign of the Year for my viral tech startup work, and also for Rising Star Designer, which was given to professionals under 30 who'd demonstrated exceptional talent and innovation, and both categories would be announced at a formal gala ceremony scheduled for Saturday, April 15th at 7 in the evening at the Grandview Hotel downtown. My hands were shaking as I read through the details about the ceremony being attended by industry leaders from across 3 states, representatives from major agencies and corporations, potential clients and collaborators, and that the event was formal attire with a reception before the awards presentation and networking opportunities afterward. I sat back from my laptop feeling something huge and overwhelming rising in my chest that was equal parts excitement and terror, because this was real professional recognition from people who actually understood what I did and valued it. And then my eyes caught on the date again and my stomach dropped. April 15th, the same night as my father's 60th birthday party. I pulled up my calendar even though I knew what I'd see, and there it was. The party scheduled for 7 o'clock at Riverside Country Club, the event my mother had assigned me decorating duties for. The celebration I'd already told them I'd attend even though every fiber of my being dreaded it. I stared at both events occupying the same evening and felt something clicking into place in my mind, a clarity that was both terrifying and liberating, because I knew with absolute certainty which event I needed to attend, and it wasn't my father's party. The choice should have been agonizing, should have required days of deliberation and guilt and weighing obligations, but instead it felt simple and obvious, and right in a way that made me realize how much had shifted inside me over the past few months since seeing that video. My family wouldn't celebrate this nomination, even if I told them about it. I knew that with the same certainty I knew my own name, they'd find ways to minimize it or dismiss it or explain why it didn't really matter. And I was done sacrificing real achievements for the performance of family harmony that had never actually included me anyway. I drafted an email to the family group chat, kept it simple and direct without justification or apology, saying only, I have a professional commitment on April 15th and won't be able to attend the party. And I hit send before I could second guess myself. The response came within 90 seconds, Michael's text appearing first saying, Are you serious right now? Followed immediately by David's message that read, This is so typical, always has to make everything about her. So selfish. And I turned my phone face down on my desk and felt my hands trembling, but also felt something that might have been freedom. My father's call came within 20 minutes of my email, his name appearing on my phone screen while I was still sitting at my desk, staring at the awards nomination and feeling my heart race with a mixture of anticipation and dread. And I answered on the third ring, already bracing myself for what was coming. Emma, what the hell is this about a professional commitment? His voice was tight with anger. That particular tone he used when he'd already decided I was being unreasonable and just needed to explain why. I've been nominated for 2 Regional Design Excellence Awards, I said, keeping my voice level. The ceremony is April 15th. It's a significant professional opportunity. There was a pause, and then he said, What award? For what? That's more important than family? And I could hear genuine confusion in his voice, like he couldn't fathom what award I could possibly have been nominated for, or why it would matter. I explained about the commercial campaign category and the Rising Star Designer recognition, about how the ceremony included industry leaders from 3 states and could lead to creative director positions at major firms, and I heard him make a sound that was almost a laugh. Emma, stop pretending your hobby is a career. This is my 60th birthday. Your brothers are giving speeches, the whole family will be there, and you're going to skip it for some participation trophy? The dismissiveness in his voice was so casual, so automatic, and I felt something inside me that had been bending for 28 years finally reach its breaking point. It's not a hobby, I said, and my voice came out harder than I'd intended. I make $95,000 a year. I've supported myself completely since college. I have clients that include 3 Fortune 500 companies. This is my career. My father actually laughed, a short bark of disbelief, and said, Sure you do, Emma. Just admit you're mad about something and stop making up stories to justify being selfish. I stood up from my desk, paced to my window, looked out at the city where I'd built my entire professional life without any help from him, and I said, I saw the video, the one where you called me your mistake child. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear my own heartbeat, could hear the faint sound of traffic from the street below, and it stretched long enough that I thought he might just hang up. Then he said quietly, You weren't supposed to see that. I was drunk and venting. It didn't mean anything. Not an apology, not a denial that he'd said it, just regret that I'd found out. And I felt something cold and clear settle over me. You were telling the truth, I said. At least own it instead of pretending you didn't mean exactly what you said. I heard him take a breath, and when he spoke again, His voice had shifted from defensive to angry, that rage he always went to when he couldn't control a situation. If you don't come to this party, don't bother coming around at all. I mean it, Emma. You skip my birthday for this nonsense and you're done. I looked at my reflection in the window. At the woman I'd become despite him rather than because of him, and I said, okay, and ended the call. For about 30 seconds, I felt pure panic, my hands shaking and my breath coming short, and then underneath the panic came something else, something that felt almost like relief. And then finally a wave of grief so profound I had to sit down on my floor and just let myself feel it. I cleared my calendar for the weekend and turned off all notifications except for work emails, gave myself permission to just exist in my apartment without the obligation to respond to anyone or explain myself to people who had already decided I was wrong. My mother's voicemail came Saturday morning while I was sitting on my couch drinking coffee and staring at nothing. Her voice tight with that particular blend of disappointment and anger she'd perfected over decades of managing family conflicts by making me responsible for everyone else's feelings. Emma, how could you upset your father like this? He's absolutely heartbroken. This is the most important birthday of his life, and you're missing it for some award show? He's telling everyone you had a work emergency, but I know the truth. You're being selfish and cruel, and I honestly don't know what's gotten into you lately. I deleted the voicemail without listening to it a second time. My brother's texts started coming in waves throughout the day. Michael sending, "You're really going to do this? You're really going to destroy Dad's birthday because you're having some kind of tantrum?" And David following with, "This is so typical of you. Always making everything about yourself. Always causing drama. Grow up." Then my phone started lighting up with messages from aunts and uncles and cousins. People I heard from maybe twice a year, suddenly very concerned about my choices. And I realized my parents had activated the extended family network with whatever version of events painted me as the villain. I didn't defend myself, didn't send explanations or justifications, just muted the conversations and felt something that might have been peace settling over me, because their anger couldn't touch me anymore when I'd finally stopped needing their approval. I spent Sunday shopping for the awards ceremony, found an elegant navy gown at a boutique downtown that fit perfectly and made me feel sophisticated and professional, booked appointments for hair and makeup on the day of the ceremony, and treated the whole process like preparation for the most important client meeting of my life, because that's essentially what it was. Monday morning, I opened my laptop to find an email from Richard with a subject line that just said, "Thinking of you." And when I clicked it open, he'd written, "Heard through the grapevine about the family tension. For what it's worth, your work speaks for itself, and you're making the right choice. Good luck at the ceremony on Saturday." I stared at his message, feeling grateful and confused in equal measure, then typed back, "Thank you for the support. How did you know about the ceremony?" His response came within an hour saying, "I'm on the Regional Design Awards Committee board, have been for 5 years. I saw your nomination come through and wasn't surprised at all given the quality of your work." Then he added, "Small World Department. My firm is actually one of the primary sponsors of the Design Awards, so I'll be at the ceremony. Looking forward to celebrating your success." I sat back from my computer feeling the universe rearranging itself into patterns I hadn't anticipated, feeling the walls between the different parts of my life becoming suddenly and unavoidably permeable. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that makes everything feel significant. The air cool and sharp as I stepped out of the car service in front of the grand ballroom where the Regional Design Excellence Awards were being held. And I could see other attendees in formal wear ascending the wide stone steps while I smoothed down my navy gown and felt my heart hammering against my ribs with a mixture of anticipation and residual grief. Somewhere across the city, my father's 60th birthday party was happening at the country club, my brothers giving their speeches, and my mother greeting guests, and my extended family probably still talking about my selfishness, But I walked through those ballroom doors and immediately felt the rightness of my choice settle over me like a physical weight lifting. The space was elegant and professional, round tables with crisp white linens surrounding a central stage. And everywhere I looked, I saw people I recognized from industry publications and social media, designers whose work I'd admired for years, creative directors from agencies I'd studied in school. A woman I'd connected with on Instagram saw me and came over immediately, said, "Emma Rodriguez, I've been hoping to meet you. Your tech campaign was absolutely brilliant." And we talked for 10 minutes about design philosophy, while I felt something unfamiliar and wonderful blooming in my chest that I eventually recognized as belonging. More people approached as I made my way to my assigned table, other nominees and industry veterans who knew my name and my work, who'd seen my viral campaign and wanted to discuss process and inspiration, and I realized I was networking without effort because these were my people in a way my family had never been. I found my seat at a table with 4 other Rising Star nominees, introduced myself to a woman named Jennifer, who designed for a sustainability brand, and a man named Marcus, who specialized in publication layouts. And we traded war stories about difficult clients and celebrated each other's nominations with genuine warmth. My phone buzzed in my clutch, and against my better judgment, I checked it. Saw the family group chat filling with photos from my father's party, everyone dressed up and smiling, my brothers with their arms around my father, my mother looking elegant in emerald green, and for just a moment, I felt the familiar ache of exclusion before I recognized that they looked perfectly happy without me, that my absence hadn't created any visible gap. I put my phone away and made a conscious decision to be present, to stop monitoring what I was missing and start experiencing what I'd chosen. The lights dimmed and the ceremony began, a polished host taking the stage to welcome everyone and outline the evening's program. And as various categories were announced and winners accepted their awards, I felt my palms start to sweat because my categories were coming up soon. Commercial campaign first and then Rising Star Designer. And despite all my success and confidence, I still felt that old familiar fear that somehow I wasn't good enough, that the nomination itself was the peak, and I shouldn't expect actual recognition. The commercial campaign category was announced by a presenter from a major advertising agency who walked to the podium with the confidence of someone who'd been judging creative work for decades, and she began describing the winning entry before naming the winner, talking about innovation in visual storytelling and unprecedented market impact and artistic excellence that elevated brand messaging into cultural conversation. I watched the screen as my tech startup campaign filled the enormous display behind the stage, my designs animated and alive, the color palette I'd agonized over looking bold and perfect, the typography I'd customized flowing across the screen, while the presenter detailed engagement metrics and viral reach and client satisfaction scores that I recognized as mine, but somehow seemed more real when announced to hundreds of industry professionals. The winner of the Commercial Campaign Excellence Award is Emma Rodriguez, the presenter said, and for a solid 3 seconds I didn't move because shock had turned my body into stone. Disbelief flooding through me, even though I'd known I was nominated, even though some part of me had hoped, because hoping and achieving were such vastly different experiences that I hadn't properly prepared for the reality of my name being called. Jennifer from my table grabbed my arm and said something I couldn't hear over the applause that seemed impossibly loud, and Marcus was standing and clapping with genuine enthusiasm, and I rose on shaking legs and walked toward the stage, trying to remember how to move like a normal person instead of someone whose entire nervous system had just been electrified. The walk felt impossibly long and too short simultaneously, and then I was climbing the steps and accepting the heavy crystal award from the presenter who was smiling warmly and saying congratulations. And I turned to face the audience holding this physical proof of professional recognition and saw hundreds of people looking at me with appreciation and respect. My speech came out steadier than I'd expected, my voice carrying across the ballroom as I thanked my clients for trusting my vision and my creativity for sustaining me through difficult times, and myself for not giving up even when people told me my work didn't matter. And that last part felt dangerously personal, but also necessary, because this moment was about more than just design excellence. The room erupted in applause that felt like validation washing over me in waves, and my section gave me a standing ovation that brought unexpected tears to my eyes, because I'd spent 28 years being invisible to the people who were supposed to love me, and here were strangers celebrating my achievement without reservation or qualification. I returned to my table still shaking and set the award down carefully, this beautiful heavy thing that proved my work had value. And Jennifer hugged me while Marcus raised his water glass in toast, and I felt joy mixing with residual grief because I wished desperately that my family could have been here to see this, even knowing they wouldn't have come, even knowing they wouldn't have cared. The Rising Star Designer category was next, which meant I needed to compose myself quickly, but then I noticed movement in the back of the ballroom and recognized James Mitchell, the CEO of my father's architecture firm, walking toward the stage to present the next award. And sudden nervousness gripped my chest, because if Richard was on the awards committee and James was presenting and my father's firm sponsored this event, how many of my father's colleagues were in this room right now, watching me accept recognition for work he'd dismissed as a hobby? James Mitchell took the stage with the easy authority of someone who'd been leading a prestigious firm for decades, his silver hair and tailored suit making him look exactly like the CEO he was, and he began his introduction of the Rising Star Designer category by talking about innovation and fresh perspectives and the importance of nurturing emerging talent in a competitive industry. The screen behind him filled with a compilation video showcasing all 5 nominees' work, and I watched my own portfolio scroll past in beautifully curated slides that made my designs look even better than I remembered. The breadth of my work over the past 3 years displayed for hundreds of industry professionals who were presumably evaluating my worthiness for recognition. My heart hammered against my ribs with renewed intensity, because winning one award felt like a miracle, but hoping for two felt dangerously greedy, like I was tempting fate or setting myself up for disappointment. And yet I couldn't stop the desperate wanting that flooded through me as James described the Rising Star winner's qualifications without naming anyone yet. The winner of the Rising Star Designer Award is Emma Rodriguez, James announced, and the room erupted in surprised applause that was noticeably louder than before, because apparently winning 2 major categories in one night was unusual enough to warrant extra enthusiasm. And I stood on shaking legs for the second time that evening, and made my way back to the stage while my mind struggled to process that this was really happening. James handed me the second Crystal Award, identical to the first, but somehow feeling even heavier with significance, and he leaned in close while shaking my hand and said quietly, "Your father works at my firm, doesn't he?" I froze completely, my smile becoming fixed and artificial as I nodded once, unable to form words because the collision of these two worlds felt surreal and terrifying. "He's here tonight, actually," James continued, still smiling warmly for the audience, while speaking only loud enough for me to hear. In the audience. Came last minute when he heard about the awards, said he wanted to support the firm's sponsored event. I turned to face the audience with both awards in my hands and scanned the room with new urgency, my eyes finally landing on a back table where I recognized Richard's kind face next to several other men in suits. And there in the middle sat my father looking absolutely stunned, his face pale and his expression frozen in what I could only describe as shock, mixed with something that might have been shame, or might have been anger, or might have been both. My prepared speech evaporated from my mind, and I stood there for several long seconds just looking at him, while the applause faded and the room waited for me to say something. And then words came from somewhere deep and honest, and perhaps slightly reckless. "Thank you so much for this incredible honor," I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected given that my father was watching me accept recognition he'd never believed I could achieve. "I want to thank everyone who believed in my vision and trusted my work, And I want to thank my own creativity and resilience for sustaining me through years when I was told my passion wasn't valuable, when I was dismissed and overlooked, and made to feel like pursuing design was foolish. The room had gone very quiet, sensing that this was veering into personal territory, but unable to look away. I'm dedicating these awards to everyone who's ever had to fight for recognition, who's been told their work doesn't matter, who's had to prove their worth over and over again to people who refuse to see it. Your value isn't determined by who acknowledges it. Your talent is real whether anyone celebrates it or not. I looked directly at my father then, saw him shrink slightly in his chair, saw Richard sitting very still beside him, saw James watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Thank you again for seeing my work and finding it worthy of recognition. It means more than you could possibly know. The applause that followed was thunderous and felt almost defiant, and I walked off that stage holding two crystal awards that proved every dismissive comment and missed art show and casual cruelty had been wrong, had always been wrong. And I returned to my table where Jennifer and Marcus both hugged me with genuine excitement, while my hands shook so badly I had to set the awards down carefully before I dropped them. The reception following the awards ceremony took place in an adjacent ballroom where round tables had been set up with wine and appetizers and soft lighting that made everything feel elegant and celebratory. And I found myself immediately surrounded by well-wishers who wanted to congratulate me on the unprecedented double win. Designers I'd admired from afar now treating me as a peer, creative directors from major agencies pressing business cards into my hand and talking about opportunities and collaboration. Jennifer stayed close beside me, acting as a buffer when the attention became overwhelming. And Marcus had disappeared to network with some art directors he recognized. And I was trying to focus on a conversation with a woman from a branding firm when I saw movement in my peripheral vision and turned to see my father pushing through the crowd with Richard and James Mitchell following behind him, all three men heading directly toward me with expressions ranging from determined to concerned to professionally neutral. My immediate instinct was to run, to grab my awards from the table where I'd left them and disappear into the parking garage and drive home to process this collision of worlds in private. But something kept my feet planted on the expensive carpet, some new instinct that refused to retreat from confrontation I hadn't started but wouldn't avoid. My father reached me first and stopped about 3 feet away. His face pale and strained in a way I'd never seen before, his expensive suit suddenly looking rumpled despite being perfectly pressed, and he opened his mouth twice before words came out. "Emma, I didn't know you'd be here," he said, his voice carrying an edge of accusation, as though my presence at an award ceremony where I'd won two major honors was somehow an ambush. "You didn't know about the nomination because you never asked about my work," I replied, my voice steadier than I'd expected, given that my heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat, and I watched him flinch slightly at the directness of my response. James stepped forward with a warm smile that seemed genuine despite the obvious tension, extending his hand to shake mine in proper congratulations. "You must be very proud, Robert," he said, turning to my father with the expectant expression of someone waiting for parental enthusiasm. "Two awards in one night is quite an achievement." My father's face did something complicated, cycling through shock and pride and resentment before settling on a forced smile that looked painful. "Yes, of course, very proud," he managed, the words sounding hollow and automatic. Richard stood slightly behind James, his kind face now showing clear discomfort as he watched this interaction unfold. And when he spoke, his voice carried a carefully measured quality that made the hair on my neck stand up. "Strange. At the retreat last month you said Emma was unemployed," Richard said, his tone conversational, but his words devastating in their quiet precision. The small group of people around us had grown quiet, sensing drama, and I saw several of my father's colleagues from his firm watching with poorly concealed interest. My father went even paler, his eyes darting between Richard and James and me. That was a misunderstanding," he stammered. "No misunderstanding," I said clearly, and every word felt like stepping off a cliff into free fall, terrifying and liberating simultaneously. You said I was your mistake, child. You said you forget you have a daughter. James's expression shifted from professionally pleasant to genuinely shocked, and other colleagues within earshot had stopped their conversations entirely, and the space around us had become a bubble of tension. Emma, not here, please, my father said quietly, his voice carrying an edge of desperation that I'd never heard before. But the words only strengthened my resolve because he'd been willing to humiliate me in private my entire life, and now suddenly cared about public perception when his own reputation was at stake. The circle of people around us had grown noticeably larger. My father's colleagues from the architecture firm, standing alongside designers and creative directors from my world, all watching this family drama unfold with the horrified fascination of witnesses to a car accident they couldn't look away from. "Why not here?" I asked, my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. "You talked about me at your company retreat. You recorded a video calling me your mistake child and uploaded it to the company shared drive where your colleagues could see it." My father's face went from pale to flushed red in seconds, his eyes darting around the circle of witnesses as he scrambled for damage control. "I was drunk, just joking around with the guys. You're taking it completely wrong," he said, his tone shifting to something placating and dismissive that I'd heard 1,000 times before. "I'm not taking it wrong," I replied calmly, and every word felt like I was finally speaking a language I'd been forbidden to use my entire life. "You've treated me as less than my brothers since the day I was born. You attended every single one of Michael's soccer games, but missed my high school art show where I won Best in Show. You and Mom bought both my brothers' cars when they graduated college, but gave me a card with $100 in it. You handed me $200 in a restaurant last month to help with rent, even though I never asked for money and I make $95,000 a year, but you needed everyone watching to see you as the generous father supporting his struggling daughter." My father tried to interrupt, raising his hand in a stopping gesture, but I continued speaking over him because I'd been silenced for 28 years and I was done being quiet. "Last week you called me and demanded I come to your birthday party tonight. When I told you I had this awards ceremony, you said if I didn't come to your party, I shouldn't bother coming around at all, so I won't. I'm taking you up on that offer." James Mitchell's expression had shifted from professionally neutral to genuinely disturbed, and he turned to my father with a look that made it clear this conversation wasn't over. "Robert, is this true? You told your daughter not to come around?" My father was scrambling now, his hands gesturing frantically as he tried to minimize the damage. "It's a family disagreement, blown completely out of proportion. You know how emotional women can get about these things." Richard stepped forward then, his kind face set in unusually stern lines, and when he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the hushed crowd. "I saw the video, James, before Robert deleted it from the shared drive. It was disturbing. He called Emma his mistake child, said he sometimes forgets he has a daughter, complained that she was a disappointment who cost them emotional energy." My father's face went redder still and he turned on Richard with sudden fury. "You told her about that? You had no right to betray my privacy like that." "He did me a favor," I said quietly, and my father's attention snapped back to me. "He finally helped me stop wondering if I was imagining things, if I was too sensitive like Mom always said, if I was the problem. The video proved I wasn't." James cleared his throat, his expression now completely professional and cold. "Robert, we need to speak privately, soon, first thing Monday morning in my office." My father seemed to realize in that moment that there would be professional consequences he hadn't anticipated, and his anger turned fully on me as though I'd orchestrated his humiliation, rather than simply stopped protecting him from it. "You've ruined everything," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "No," I said clearly, holding both crystal awards against my chest like shields. "I just stopped protecting you from the consequences of your own choices." I left the award ceremony within 20 minutes of that final confrontation, slipping out a side entrance while my father was still standing in the reception hall, surrounded by colleagues whose expressions ranged from sympathetic to deeply uncomfortable. And I drove home in my navy gown, with both crystal awards carefully buckled into the passenger seat beside me like precious cargo, feeling emotionally exhausted in a way that went bone deep, but also strangely lighter, as though I'd been carrying a weight for so long I'd forgotten it was there until I finally set it down. The following days brought information through unexpected channels as Richard sent me a brief professional email explaining that my father had been placed on administrative probation at the firm pending a review of his conduct, that the promotion to senior partner had been denied, that James Mitchell had made it clear the firm's family values extended to how employees treated their own families, and my father's behavior had fallen well short of those standards. The family group chat I was still technically part of exploded with messages, my brothers and various aunts and uncles expressing outrage at how I'd humiliated my father in front of his colleagues, how I'd potentially cost him his career over a private family matter, how I was selfish and vindictive and had always been the problem child. And I read through the messages with a strange detachment before exiting the group chat entirely and blocking everyone's numbers except my mother's, because I wasn't ready to completely sever that connection, even though I knew it was probably just as toxic as the rest. My mother called 2 days after the ceremony, her voice tearful and accusatory in equal measure as she said, "Your father might lose his job because of you, Emma. How could you do this to him? To our whole family?" I sat in my apartment with the awards displayed on my desk, where I could see them, and replied calmly, "No, Mom, not because of me. Because of himself. Because he lied to his colleagues and called his daughter a mistake and got caught doing it." There was a long silence on the other end of the line before my mother said quietly, "I should have defended you more when you were growing up. I see that now." And it was such a small acknowledgement, nowhere near enough to make up for 28 years of complicity through silence. But it was something, a crack in the wall of denial. "I needed you to defend me then," I told her, feeling tears prick my eyes despite my best efforts to stay composed. "I don't need it anymore. I've learned to defend myself." A month after the ceremony, I accepted a creative director position at a boutique design agency in the city, a role that came with a salary of $160,000 and full creative control over a team of 6 designers, and the kind of professional respect I'd spent years believing I'd never deserve. 6 months after that, I heard through Richard, who had become an unexpected friend and mentor, that my father had taken early retirement from the firm and accepted a lower position at a smaller company, that the scandal had effectively ended the career trajectory he'd spent decades building. My brothers reached out separately over the following year, with stilted apologies that felt more motivated by social pressure than genuine remorse. Michael sending a text that said he'd been wrong to dismiss my work, and David leaving a voicemail explaining that he'd been following Mom's lead in how to treat me. And I responded politely to both, but maintained careful distance because I'd learned that some relationships aren't worth salvaging just because they're family. 1 year after the award ceremony, I was thriving in ways I'd never imagined possible, living in a beautiful apartment where my 2 crystal awards were displayed prominently on floating shelves in my office, alongside framed prints of my most successful campaigns, having occasional coffee meetings with my mother where I was slowly teaching her about boundaries and healthy communication, though I knew she'd probably never fully understand why I'd had to walk away from the rest of them. I had no contact with my father or brothers and had reached a place of genuine peace with that absence, no longer feeling like I was missing something essential, but rather recognizing that I'd gained everything that mattered by choosing myself. I was invited to present at a regional design conference about building a creative career against opposition. And as I stood on that stage looking out at an audience of 200 designers and students and creative professionals, I saw a young woman in the third row who reminded me viscerally of my younger self, that same uncertain hope mixed with determination in her expression. After the panel ended, she approached me nervously and said, My family doesn't understand my work either. They think I should get a real job, and sometimes I wonder if they're right. I looked at her and remembered every time I doubted myself, every missed art show and dismissive comment and moment of wondering if I was the problem, and I said clearly, "Then do it for yourself. That's the only approval you'll ever need." She thanked me and walked away, and I stood there thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. How I'd spent 28 years seeking love and validation from people who couldn't or wouldn't see my worth, who'd treated me as less than because I didn't fit their narrow definition of success, who'd called me their mistake and made me believe for far too long that maybe I was. Now I saw my own worth clearly, built a life that reflected my values and talents, surrounded myself with people who celebrated rather than diminished me, and that recognition that had to come from within before it could come from anywhere else had changed everything. I didn't need my father's pride or my brother's respect or my mother's belated defense, because I had something more valuable and more lasting, the unshakable knowledge that I was enough exactly as I was, that my creativity and determination and resilience had value that existed completely independent of anyone else's acknowledgement. That was enough. That was everything.